place your hand on a surface, a table, a wall, the screen in front of you. Don't just do it casually, slow it down. Pay attention to the exact moment your skin meets something solid. There's a point where movement stops, where your hand can't go any further, where it feels like you've made contact. It feels immediate, obvious, almost too simple to question. Your brain labels it instantly. This is touch, this is contact, this is the boundary between you and everything else. But if you hold that moment a little longer, if you focus not just on the action but on the sensation itself, something subtle starts to stand out. What you're actually feeling isn't the surface, it's resistance. Your hand doesn't pass through, not because it merges with the object, but because something is stopping it. There's a force pushing back, holding the boundary in place, creating the illusion that two solid things have met. And that assumption feels so natural that it almost never gets questioned. We grow up trusting that when two objects meet, they touch. That contact is a direct interaction, a physical merging at the surface. But that idea, as intuitive as it feels, is not what's actually happening. Because at the level where reality is built, where matter is structured and interactions are defined, the moment you think of as contact never actually occurs. Touch, as we experience it, is incredibly convincing. Press your hand harder against that surface, and the sensation intensifies. More pressure, more feedback, more certainty that something solid is there. Slide your fingers across it and you feel texture, friction, variation. Everything about the experience reinforces the same idea. Your body is physically interacting with another object. It's easy to imagine it like two surfaces meeting, like pressing your palm into clay or placing one object directly on top of another. The mental image is clean and intuitive. Your skin reaches the surface pushes back, and the two come into contact. That's the model we carry without thinking, the one that explains almost every physical interaction in everyday life. But even in that simple experience, there are hints that something deeper is happening. The harder you press, the more resistance you feel, as if something is compressing or pushing back with increasing strength. It's not just a static boundary, it's dynamic, responsive, almost like an invisible cushion that becomes stronger the more you push into it. Imagine pressing two magnets together with the same poles facing each other. As they get closer, you feel a growing force pushing them apart, stronger and stronger, until they refuse to meet. Your hands feel the resistance clearly, even though the magnets never actually touch. That sensation, that pushback, is surprisingly similar to what you feel when you press your hand against a surface. The difference is that with magnets, you can see the gap, you can observe that they never make contact. With everyday objects, that gap is hidden, far too small to notice, buried deep beneath the scale we're used to seeing. So the experience of touch feels like contact, but the mechanics behind it might be something else entirely. To understand what's really happening, you have to leave the scale of everyday life and move inward, far beyond what your eyes can see. Imagine zooming into your hand, past the skin, past the cells, deeper into the structure of matter itself. What looks solid from the outside begins to dissolve into layers, into patterns, into structures that are far less dense than they appear. At the atomic level, matter is mostly empty space. Atoms are not solid spheres packed tightly together. They are more like diffuse clouds, with a dense nucleus at the center and electrons existing in regions of probability around it. If you could shrink yourself down and look at your hand at that scale, it wouldn't look like a continuous surface, it would look like a vast, sparse landscape, with enormous gaps between the particles that define it. Now take that same perspective and apply it to the surface you're touching. It, too, is made of atoms, structured in its own arrangement, with its own vast empty spaces between particles. When your hand moves toward that surface, it's not two solid objects approaching each other. It's two fields of particles, each surrounded by space, each defined by forces rather than rigid boundaries. As the distance between them decreases, something important happens. The outer regions of those atoms, the areas where electrons exist, begin to interact. Not by merging, not by overlapping in a simple physical way, but by exerting influence, by responding to each other's presence through forces that operate at that scale. And here's the key detail: those interactions begin before any physical contact could ever occur. Long before the particles of your hand could meet the particles of the surface, forces emerge that prevent them from ever occupying the same space. So the moment you've been thinking about this entire time, that instant where your hand meets the surface, where you assume two things finally come into contact, isn't what it seems. Because if you could zoom in far enough, if you could actually observe what's happening at the level where these interactions are defined, you wouldn't see two surfaces touching at all. You would see a gap, incredibly small, almost impossible to imagine, but still a gap. And within that gap, you would see something even more surprising, a constant interaction of forces, pushing, resisting, holding the boundary in place without ever allowing true contact to occur. The interactions that define matter are not based on solid contact, they're based on forces, specifically electromagnetic forces. Electrons carry negative charge, and when two atoms approach each other, the electrons in one begin to repel the electrons in the other. This isn't a gentle effect, it's a fundamental property of how charged particles behave. As your hand moves closer to a surface, the electrons in your skin and the electrons in the surface begin to interact more strongly. The closer they get, the stronger the repulsion becomes, increasing rapidly as the distance decreases. It's not linear, it escalates quickly, creating a barrier that becomes effectively impossible to cross. Imagine two invisible cushions made of energy, each surrounding an object, each becoming denser and more resistant as something tries to push into it. When those cushions meet, they don't merge, they compress slightly and then push back, creating the sensation of resistance that your brain interprets as touch. This is why your hand stops when it reaches a surface, not because the atoms of your skin have collided with the atoms of the object, but because the forces between them have become strong enough to prevent any further movement. The boundary you feel is not a line of contact, it's a zone of interaction, a region where opposing forces balance out and hold everything in place. If you could visualize it, it wouldn't look like two solid surfaces meeting. It would look like two glowing fields pressing against each other, fluctuating, resisting, never quite merging. The sensation of touch is not the result of direct contact, it's the result of being stopped before contact can ever happen. So if nothing ever truly touches, why does it feel so real, so immediate, so convincing? The answer lies in how your brain interprets the signals it receives from your body. Your skin is filled with receptors that respond to pressure, to deformation, to changes in force. When you press your hand against a surface, those receptors activate, sending signals through your nervous system to your brain. Your brain doesn't receive a detailed map of atomic interactions or electromagnetic forces. It receives patterns of activation, changes in pressure, signals that indicate resistance. From those signals, it constructs a model of what's happening, a simplified version of reality that is useful, efficient, and easy to understand. In that model, resistance becomes contact, a force pushing back becomes a solid surface, the absence of movement becomes the presence of an object. It's not that your brain is wrong, it's that it's translating a complex physical process into a form that makes sense at the scale you live in. Think of it like a user interface on a computer. When you drag a file into a folder, you see icons moving, windows opening, actions completing. But underneath that interface, there are layers of code, electrical signals, processes that look nothing like what you see on the screen. The interface is not the reality, it's a representation designed to be intuitive. Your sense of touch works the same way. It presents you with a clear, simple experience. Even though the underlying mechanics are far more complex. You don't feel electromagnetic repulsion, you feel a surface. You don't perceive a gap, you perceive contact. Reframing reality, now go back to that simple action, placing your hand on a surface. The movement looks the same, the sensation feels the same, nothing about the experience has changed, and yet the meaning of that moment is completely different. Where you once imagined two objects meeting, you can now picture something else entirely, a tiny, invisible gap separating them. Because at the level where reality is actually defined, the boundary between you and everything else is never crossed, it's only ever approached. I post videos that break down how reality actually works from your brain to your body to the world around you, so if that sounds interesting, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.